Good morning, all. Angela, one more time. Hopefully, this is the last one. Sound check presenter's laptop. Sound check presenter's laptop. Check clerk's laptop. Sound check clerk's laptop. Thanks, all. You're free to chat now.
Let me know if you need anything, please, Lloyd.
No?
Okay, thanks. Just if I disappear, I've done it a couple times now, but you know where I'm going.
We understand that. Councillors, we are now live. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during the committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during the meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. I will now commence a roll call. Please indicate your presence when I call your name. Mayor Eisenberger.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, sir. Councillor Wilson, please.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Farr.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, sir. Councillor Nan.
Good morning, Chair. Present.
Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Jackson.
For Councillor Danko's sake, here.
I have so missed that. Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Pauls.
I am here as well.
Good morning, Councillor.
Morning.
Councillor Danko.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Pearson.
Good morning, here.
Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Good morning.
And Councillor Johnson, I understand that you have an NPCA meeting this morning, so you'll be stepping out at some point.
Yes, I will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ferguson. I know you're here. You're muted, Councillor.
Yeah, present. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Vanderbeek.
I'm here. Good
Good
morning.
morning, Councillor. Councillor Whitehead. And Councillor Whitehead is not here. And Councillor Partridge. And I don't see Councillor Partridge either. Thank you. We're moving on to item 1 in the agenda, which is the approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, there are several changes to the agenda today. Item 7.1, the 2021 Tax Supported Capital Budget Report FCS 20101. A presentation has been added to accompany this report. Therefore, the matter has been moved to item 6.1. And staff has also provided an information report that provides additional information requested at the last tax capital budget meeting, which is listed as item 6.1.
Thank you. Are there any discussions or amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, may I please have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as so Councillor Johnson and Councillor Vanderbeek, please. This will be an electronic vote. And it's up now.
No. No, it's not.
Okay, you're in support, Councillor Pearson?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Here it comes.
Oh, you got
It's-
it now?
No, it
No?
was circling and stopped. Sorry.
Okay, so we'll accept the hand
Yeah,
signal.
there. Got it. It came. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Farr?
How are we doing there, Councillor Farr? He's giving me the thumbs up and it's still spinning. And Councillor Partridge, you're good?
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and that vote carries. So we are now moving on to declarations of interest. Members of the committee, are there any declarations of interest this morning? Councillor Pauls. If you could unmute yourself. please.
Yes,
Thank
I just did. Thank you. Through the chair, 7.1, the Police Service Board capital expenditure. I will declare a conflict of interest as my son is hired by the Hamilton Police. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others? Councillor Collins?
Yep, Mr. Chair, transparency disclosure. My sister is a police officer, but I've been advised by the Integrity Commissioner that I can speak to the capital budget items.
Thank you, Councillor, for sharing that information with us. Anybody else have conflicts this morning? Seeing none. For those who have noted a conflict, please ensure that when it comes time to vote electronically on a matter, you'll use the abstain option, and therefore your conflict will be noted correctly. And don't forget to fill out the forms that the clerks will forward to you. At this moment, I'd like to go to Mayor Eisenberger, who would like to provide us some comments this morning, sir. Good morning.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And I thought it would be appropriate, since we're all together, that we at least provide some information around the events of this past week relative to protest. As you know, the encampment or the tent facility out the front of City Hall was very ably and I think very effectively and very sensitively dealt with by our bylaw enforcement officers as well as police in support of city staff that required that tents are not allowed on city property, and obviously COVID rules and other matters were looked after there as well. And then, as you know, the events continued on with additional protests out in the forecourt, very allowable in terms of the limits some of the time in terms of numbers of people. And yesterday, the city manager we had continuously offered opportunities for them to meet in City Hall with some of the organizers to have a conversation and listen to their concerns. We thought on several occasions we had that organized, and as of yesterday, at around 5 o'clock, we thought we were heading down for a meeting with two individuals, and unfortunately, they decided to go elsewhere. So their message was, "It's you meet with all of us or none of us." And so I've intimated that I'm certainly interested in a conversation to hear their concerns, but not interested in a confrontation going forward. And then what ensued thereafter was virtually an occupation of our ground floor area that the police needed to attend to and did. So we thank them for that. What we were going to share with the individual, and I think I shared this with you last night by email, was information around the amount of monies that have been spent in the city of Hamilton over the last 6 years on affordable housing and homelessness. And so the numbers, and I'll send you the entire document. It didn't all appear in the press release, and I'll send you the entire document prepared by our staff in terms of what's been expended in our community. But starting in 2015 through to 2020, each of those years we had more than $100 million spent on homelessness and housing each and every year. And actually, the high point year was 2016, which was 138 million, and this past year at $128 million on homelessness and housing by federal, provincial, and municipal governments in the city of Hamilton, which I think is impressive. We also acknowledge that the city council, led by Councillor Collins and myself, did approve a $50 million plan over and above that for additional housing supports that actually helps the projects get underway. And I think that's a very, very key and important investment. So we will continue to share information and continue to work with our federal and provincial partners. The federal government has outlined a homelessness and housing strategy that has yet to be fulfilled in a big way. We got some recent money of $10.4 million to leverage some additional projects, which is fantastic. But there's more needed, and we'll continue to work with our federal and provincial partners to look for those additional opportunities. And when I'm done, Mr. Chair, you might want to ask City Manager if she wanted to add anything else in terms of additional information. The one thing I did want to address, however, was last week there was an allegation made against the police of harassment of an individual as it relates to the activities that were happening on the City Hall forecourt. That I'd asked for that information to be shared with me, and it wasn't. But the police did investigate and discovered that this was an incident that happened 3 kilometers away in and around Barton Street and was a routine traffic stop as a result of someone running a stop sign. It had nothing to do with anything happening at the City Hall location. I think it was an unfortunate allegation made very publicly, which I think is harmful to the police force and the hardworking men and women that are out there every day serving and protecting in our community. And it was a very public statement, and I think it requires a public apology. So I'm going to ask Councillor Nan to publicly apologize to our police force for an unsubstantiated claim that was born not to be true and shouldn't have been made in the first place. On that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask her to do do that apology. I think it's the right thing to do. You know, when we mess up, we need to fess up. I respect the fact that folks want to have a position of defunding police, and there are a few that have indicated support for 20% or 50% reductions. I'm not sure what the number is anymore. And, you know, you're perfectly entitled to do that. But to throw out unsubstantiated allegations that don't hold up and are unfair to our men and women in uniform is inappropriate and certainly requires an appropriate apology and response. On that, Mr. Chair, if the city manager would like to add anything to the efforts over the last number of weeks, I'd be happy for her to share that. And if Councillor Nan would address those issues, I'd be happy to hear that apology from her as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam City Manager.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, first and foremost, excuse me, the city is concerned about public safety. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our numbers are continuing to increase in the city. The medical officer of health has expressed that. And while we fully support the protests on the forecourt, we've had to continually to remind about the COVID restrictions and the numbers because they've often exceeded the 25, and in fact, there's been call-outs to ask more people to come. As the mayor mentioned, there's been offers, I believe 3 times now, to meet. We've clarified that for public meetings and live streaming, we've invited them to delegate to council, where all members of council and decisions are made to make a delegation. We were open to listen to their concerns, but the public meetings and decision making happens for all members of the public at council overall. We're continuing, as I said, to make public safety issues a priority, to make sure protests are being done safely so it doesn't keep our other residents from accessing City Hall for city business, and of course staff safety at all times. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nan, did you wish to make a comment?
Absolutely, through the chair. Absolutely, through the chair. I'm not sure what's going on with my microphone. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely, wholeheartedly happy to promote a culture around this table of apologizing humbly and with humility when it is deemed worthy or requested of us. And I recognize that I mischaracterized the officers involved in the traffic violation, and I sincerely apologize to the 2 officers who were conducting their routine business related to traffic in Ward 3. I do remain, however, very firm that the experiences of marginalized individuals of police intimidation is a real experience. And it's been well documented, not only as a situation that we experience here in Hamilton, but as a reality for every city and municipality across the country in terms of the experiences those who are racialized and Indigenous experience at the hands of the police. And so when we sit with those truths, right, both things can be true. We live in a complicated world where we sit with many realities that often come up against each other, butt up against each other, and yet it is our role as elected officials to see the realities that are facing us and address each one of them. So from that perspective, I remain firm that that is something that I will remain diligently critical of and seek redress and action on in terms of how we may improve our services to reduce the experiences of intimidation by our marginalized residents or those residents who've been made marginalized. I would love to be able to say, moving forward, that that will no longer be a reality and that that is something that everybody around this table and anybody else who's responsible will deliver as an outcome for our population. Again, to the 2 officers involved with the incident, I do apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ann. And so we'll cut off the discussion and debate at that point. We're going to move on to item number 3, please. Approval of the minutes of the previous meetings. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of the October 29th, November 23rd, and November 27th meetings as presented. Moved by Councillor Collins and seconded by Councillor Pearson. If we require an electronic vote, please indicate you vote now. If the vote doesn't come up on your screen, please advise. And the vote is up now at my end. And the vote carries 13, nothing. Thank you. So we are now moving on, if I am correct, Madam Clerk, to item number 6 in the staff presentations. Item 6.1 on our agenda today is 2021 tax-supported capital budget. Mr. Mike Zagaric, the General Manager of Finance and Corporate Services, will provide the presentation respecting report number FCS 20201.
Good morning, through you.
Good morning, Mr. Zagaric.
Deputy Mayor, and it was just less than a week ago that staff presented a summary of our 2021 tax-supported capital budget. And you'll see on today's agenda an information report in response to a series of questions that were made on November 27th GIC. So again, I just refer you to that information report and the responses specific to those questions. In addition, I do have a short presentation today as it relates to some of the motions and directions coming out of the November 27th GIC. And finally, staff are available today if there are specific questions as it relates to the proposed or recommended capital projects. So again, staff are available today to answer those questions. Just a reminder as it relates to process, this is our last scheduled GIC, and if required, we would have to work with clerks to schedule a follow-up GIC in the new year as it relates to the 2021 tax-supported capital budget. So again, as it relates to this presentation, one of the directions coming out of the November 27th GIC was to present an alternative funding option, alternative to recommendation B at the staff report. Recommendation B came out of the November council meeting where staff were directed to incorporate an additional 0.5% capital levy as it relates to our discretionary block funds. So these are our funding envelopes as it relates to a series of specific capital assets. So again, on November 27th, staff incorporated that in the presentation. And again, today we will present an alternative funding strategy versus the 0.5% capital levy increase. Just a reminder that our current position represents a 0.9% capital levy increase. In addition to the 0.5 that I just spoke to, is an additional 0.4 as it relates to the city's commitments towards the ISIP transit program, as well as some development charge exemption obligations. So again, our current position represents a 0.9% capital levy increase. The other direction coming out of the November 27th GIC was to reflect the capital budget submission presented to GIC last week through Hamilton Police Services Board. And so you'll see a reconciliation slide in today's presentation as it relates to that direction. And finally, as it relates to the first agenda item, the alternative funding option, if it's the will of committee to consider that alternative funding option, staff are presenting a potential revised recommendation. So again, just a placeholder, item 3, a placeholder as it relates to the first reporting back, or the first item, the reporting back on the funding option. Specific to the alternative funding option is staff are presenting a alternative approach to the 0.5% capital levy increase. The 0.5% capital levy increase would generate an additional $4.5 million. And what we heard from Council on November 11th is a interest in directing those funds towards data good repair. As a result, staff are putting forward a alternative approach whereby we would leverage an additional $3 million in our federal gas tax reserve that will continue to provide about $5 million of remaining balance to assist us with any in-year capital opportunities or infrastructure opportunities that may arise in part from a stimulus program, or as well that may require some support as it relates to our ISIP transit program. So again, the additional $3 million, while representing a draw in the reserve, would allow us to maintain some balance in that reserve. Staff are also proposing an additional draw from the 2020 capital financing surplus, an additional $1.5 million, and that be targeted towards the facilities management envelope that we presented on November 27th. And I should have mentioned, apologize, the $3 million in federal gas tax we are suggesting aligns with the transportation infrastructure envelope that staff presented again on November 27th. So what committee has before you today is in place of the additional 0.5% capital levy increase, an option to draw from reserves as a one-time in 2021, $4.5 million, and that would represent a reduction to the capital levy increase of our current position of 0.9 down to 0.4. And just a reminder that staff presented last week our current position as it relates to the overall residential tax increase, as it relates to municipal property taxes of 3.3%. And if council were to reconsider the 0.5% direction, that would bring our current residential tax increase, our current position, to about 2.8%. So again, staff are providing this alternative approach if it's the will of committee and council. Further to the alternative financing approach, the staff are directed to revise the capital submission for Hamilton Police Services to reflect the board's recommendations to council that were presented on the November 27th GIC, and I believe are on today's agenda as well. You can see that we've captured, in addition to projects that are in the 2021 capital budget, but some in-year projects as well. So I'll just quickly, through you, Deputy Mayor, I'll just quickly go through the list of projects on this slide. You'll recall an in-year discussion as it relates to the police station 40, and that in-year decision was an overall $8 million investment. So we're just capturing that in-year decision of council. You'll recall maybe from last week's GIC that I presented a $6 million next generation 911 project within the IT envelope. Part of that $6 million represents a Hamilton Police Services allocation of $2 million. So just wanting to point out, and you'll see a footnote on the bottom of this slide, that we aren't duplicating the $2 million, that the overall project is $6 million, but Hamilton Police Services have reflected $2 million of that $6 million as being attributed to the service. Hamilton Police Station's roof repairs and HVAC improvements. This is consistent with their multi-year budget submission last year, $200,000. As well, the police personal issued portable radio replacement investment at $840,000 is consistent with their multi-year submission. So you can see on the far right column, no change. Police air-cooled chiller replacement East End, again consistent at $500,000. The Central Station feasibility study retrofit, that represents a required investment of $500,000, and we'll work with Hamilton Police Services as to how to reflect that change of $500,000 into the capital budget. So again, a bit of a change in terms of how they're accounting for that between their operating and capital budgets, and we'll take that away and work with the service in the coming weeks and months. A series of projects were amended, effectively removed from their 2021 submission that were reflected in their multi-year forecast last year. And you can see the bottom three projects are not part of the 2021 capital submission. So we've reflected those projects by removing those projects from the recommended 2021 list. So again, you can see a difference of approximately $752,000. I just want to point out that the bottom three projects were expected to be funded from Hamilton Police Services reserves. So that does not reflect an adjustment to the capital levy. And on the retrofit project, again, the central station will work with Hamilton Police Services on how to capture that going forward. Again, we'll engage with the service in the coming weeks and months. Coming back to the alternative funding strategy, you may recall recommendation B reflected the direction we received on November 11th as it relates to additional 0.5%. If it's the will of committee, and I believe the clerks advised it would require reconsideration at council. If it's the will of committee to proceed with a funding strategy drawing from reserves rather than the 0.5% capital levy increase, the recommendation B would have to be amended accordingly with a draw from the unallocated capital reserve and from the federal gas tax reserve. And finally, the additional draw from the Hamilton Police Services reserves that we reflected based on their previous multi-year submissions would have to be amended as well. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just a short presentation, just circling back on a number of the motions and directions that were provided to us last week at our General Issues Committee. Again, staff are available today to answer any questions regarding any of the proposed projects. And just a reminder that if committee isn't in a position to approve the tax-supported capital budget today, is we would work with clerks at looking at an alternative day in January and then bring that forward to a council meeting in the new year for approval. And through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, happy to answer any questions that committee members might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zagaric. First, before we go to the questions, I just want to have the clerks, Mr. Zagaric, you indicated that you believe there a reconsideration was necessary at council. Could you just restate the item that you were speaking to, and then the clerks can confirm that for us?
So through you, Mr. Through you, Deputy Mayor, I believe the November 11th council meeting was a direction to staff to incorporate a 0.5% capital levy increase for block funding. And again, that was a motion at the November 11th council meeting, and I'll leave it in the hands of clerks whether that to amend that, whether that would require a reconsideration.
So we will get back to the committee and staff in a moment after the clerks look into that. We're now going to open the floor for questions. Given that the complexity of the budget item before us, I'm going to time the amount of time that each councillor is asking the question and then deduct that away from the answers, because I think the answers may be more comprehensive than usual. So we'll start with Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, and I'm starting the clock now. Thank you.
All right, great. Through you to Mike. Mike, just to be clear, I think the first direction to staff was to reintroduce the 0.5% extra on the levy as we have in prior years. And then at our last budget meeting, there was the direction that you've responded to today to ask, how do we capture more road and sidewalk and infrastructure work, which is, I mean, there isn't a year that goes by that we don't seek ways and opportunities to increase those resources for those services and those upgrades. The request was, how do we accomplish the extra investment in road and sidewalk work while not impacting the levy? And so what you've come forward with here today is an opportunity really to accomplish both, and that is to make those additional investments I'm assuming that will be equally distributed to all roads. It doesn't say minor maintenance, but I'm assuming that, like with past years, the recommendation is to equally split that amongst all wards to catch up on those deficiencies. And at the same time, in order to accomplish that, as you've referenced, we would procedurally need to, at our next council meeting, reconsider the 0.5%. And if you could just refresh my memory, which takes us from what position on a global tax rate to the new position.
Thank you. Mr. Zagarek?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think I heard a few questions there. So to the first question regarding the alternative funding approach drawing from reserves, again, I'll just draw committee's attention to slide number 3, where we've earmarked the $4.5 million really in 2 funding envelopes. One is for transportation infrastructure, and we'll seek direction from committee as to how that would be directed or allocated. So again, we've just identified that right now as a funding envelope, and the second being facilities management, $1.5 million. And you may recall at our last general issues committee, there was a report regarding some unfunded requirements around roof maintenance. So again, that's a potential funding strategy as it relates to those assets. So again, this is an alternative funding strategy that this is an alternative funding strategy.
Just hang on, Mr. Zagarek. Yeah. So I'm not sure we're good. Thank you, Mr. Zagarek. Sorry for the interruption.
No, not a problem. So this alternative funding strategy, to the councillor's question around our global residential tax increase position, we reported last week, and I believe the budget document should be disseminated shortly. We're currently at around that 3.3% residential tax increase position, and reflecting a 0.9% capital levy increase. So the potential amendment with respect to 0.5 would bring us down to about a 2.8% residential tax increase.
That's terrific. Well, if I could provide some direction, if we support the alternative that you provided, which I think is worthy of support, just to be clear then, if we could suggest that the $3 million be equally divided in the minor maintenance, which I believe would give everybody about an extra 200,000.
Kind introduction, yes.
Please hold on, Councillor.
Daughter of Brian.
To everyone on, to all of the staff, can you just make sure that your microphones are muted, please? Thank you. Sorry about that, Councillor Collins. I'll add that to your time.
No, that's okay. So I just want to be sure, Mike, is there an opportunity for us to be more specific that it's $200,000 for road and sidewalk to catch up on infrastructure deficits in each ward across the city as part of the minor maintenance? I'm assuming that's an amendment we can make at council when the reconsideration motion comes forward, which I will put as I've asked for this last meeting.
Thank you.
Through you, yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if it's the will of committee and council to direct that $3 million towards the minor maintenance projects, we would reflect that as an amendment in the project list.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I think you were a part of the push to get the road and sidewalk. So I know it can't happen procedurally today, but going through to council, if you would be so kind as to second that reconsideration, I would appreciate it. Those are my questions for this.
It would be my pleasure, Councillor. Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair.
There you go.
Coffee was. I just have a few sort of high-level questions, and I'll probably have to come back on again, but I just want to make sure I understand the discussion around the capital levy item and the 0.5%. So just fundamentally, was noted that we have a surplus at present in 2020 in capital funding, I think of 8.3%, and I'm through you to Mr. Zagarek. Is this the norm that we would have such a surplus of that size, and what might be the reason for it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Zagarek?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that has been our experience over the last number of years, and there's really two factors that drive the capital financing surpluses. One is our assumptions around the cost of borrow, and just a reminder to committee is we've revised that as part of the 2021 tax capital budget process. We revised it from a 5% to a 3%. So I expect that will result in if there are future capital financing surpluses, having lower surpluses or lesser surpluses in future years. The other factor is through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we make assumptions around the completion date for these projects. We issue the debt when the projects are substantially complete, and we are likely overly aggressive with respect to our assumptions around this substantial completion date. So just the timing of issuing the debt is another factor as it relates to driving the surpluses at year end. And so again, we've made some adjustments around that timing where we've adjusted to a April or July date. And so that's something we continue to monitor with the program areas as well.
Thank you, sir. Councillor?
Thank you. Just on the practice of the 0.5% from the tax levy operating to capital, just to back up for a minute, and I've said this before, but I'd like to state it again. In previous years, you've said to us that we are well below the threshold for capital reinvestment, which I believe you identified to be about 15 to 20% is the average reinvestment formula for municipalities in Ontario. We were in around that range prior to the year 2000, but we fell down to about 9%, and as of last year, we've creeped up to 11%. I'm wondering the rationale for not doing it this year is noted as one of affordability. What is going to change next year on that front? Because presumably, as you've noted, monies from senior levels of government for COVID are taking us to the end of March of next year. How are we going to get back on track of earmarking that amount to try and tackle and at least creep up to that threshold of a 15 to 20% when we are far below that right now?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Zagaric?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, when we started to develop the capital budget that was presented to committee, you may recall we were in a current position of forecasting a 4% residential tax increase, and that reflected a 0.4% capital levy increase. Given that our historical experience has been council's approved residential tax increases on average of about 2% over the last decade, and given that we were at about 2 times the historical outcome that council has wanted to arrive at the end of the budget process, what staff had recommended was pausing on the 0.5% and proceeding with a dedicated 0.4% for the transit investments that we are leveraging federal provincial funding on, as well as funding our development charge requirements, or development charge exemption requirements. So again, that was a driving factor to staff recommending the pausing for 1 year. What we are hoping to realize in 2021, what we hope is to come out of this pandemic and to see some higher levels of consumer and commercial industrial investment that may result in a positive impact in terms of our non-tax revenues. So again, we're hoping coming out of this pandemic is to see more of a normal level of investment in our community, and that may affect the ability to pay of our residents as it relates to the tax increase. So again, the principal factor to staff's recommendation was where we were sitting in October, which was a 4%, and some of the challenges as it relates to the current pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Zagaric. Councillor?
The unallocated amount, Mr. Zagaric, of 2 million in the capital financing surplus pot. Is it within the will of this council to expend that money for capital funding, such as housing, for example?
Thank you.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, the reserves are council has authority over the allocation of funds from the reserve. Our previous practice has been to direct any capital financing surplus available to the unallocated capital, principally for in-year allocations. So our normal experience has been in-year. There's opportunities for investment, and given that they are unbudgeted because they are in-year opportunities, we turn to reserves to fund those initiatives. So again, if it's the will of council to direct a portion of that in 2021 in year towards housing or any other initiatives, that's in the control and authority of council.
Thank you.
Thank
Councillor, you have 2 minutes left.
Oh, heavens. Thank you. I'm going to take a break right now, revisit my notes, and I may opt to come back on with respect to a question of why transportation has been identified as the infrastructure deficit that we're going at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And the next speaker is Councillor Partridge. Councillor Partridge, there you go. And I'm starting your clock now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to a couple of questions for clarification. First of all, I do want to thank Councillor Collins and yourself, sir, for revisiting this. And I do agree with the position to divide the money equally across all wards. We've heard every one of us, I think, speak about the deficits that we have in terms of sidewalks and roads. And my question is, for clarification, Mike, I thought I heard the alternative funding is to replace the 0.5% levy with a draw on the gas tax and the reserves. And then I thought I heard you say that that would bring it down to 0.4 instead of the 0.5. Did I hear correct on that?
Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct. When we presented on November 27th last week, we reflected a 0.9% capital levy increase. So again, the alternative would be to replace the 0.5% levy increase with a draw from reserves, bringing us down to, again, a 0.4%. And that would be targeted or invested in transit as it relates to leveraging federal provincial funding and funding $2 million towards DC exemptions.
Thank you.
Okay,
Councillor.
thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And so just to further clarify, I also thought I heard that with that in play, the overall tax currently sits at 3.3% tax increase on the levy. And with this reflected and other things, it would be 2.8%. And is that operating and capital? So the tax increase to our residents on the levy, both operating and capital, would be 2.8%. Is that correct?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct. Just a note that the original 3.3% assumed a 2% increase for boards and agencies. So subject to what the boards and agencies present in the new year and what council approves, that would affect our current position. So whether it's the 3.3 or 2.8, that may be a factor. And the final remaining factor would be the business cases and council referred items. There's a series of business cases that will be presented, and I believe there may be one or a small number of council referred items as well that committee need to deliberate on, and that could contribute to the current position as well.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Chair, we would be dealing with all of that in the new year. But the 2.8%, Mike, I'm glad to hear you say that that did include or is the assumption that the boards and agencies are coming in at the 2%. I just want to make it clear that I didn't vote for that 2%. I voted for 0%. So if we're sitting at 2.8 now, the 0%, we would be in a little bit better position. But we're heading in the right direction. And I thank staff very much for all the hard work on this. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I see no other speakers before us. So at the moment, to the question by Mr. Zagaric, reconsideration would be required to change the 0.5% increase for capital financing of the discretionary block funding projects. So my question to the clerk then is, when I'm looking at the recommendations that are before the committee today, item C seems to be addressing that issue. So would we have to defer all of item C to council? What, give me some direction here in terms of how we should proceed.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, B as in boy is referring to an additional net levy increase of 4.6 million in 2021. And that's at the 0.5. So if C is also, if you're asking for an increase above and beyond that in C, yes, you would definitely have to either defer this to another capital budget meeting or refer subsection C to council for consideration when this report goes forward. And that would have to be done after the reconsideration if you no longer require the 0.5 levy and they're going to draw from the reserves.
So as it stands right now, B and C would be deferred to council then? Am I hearing correct?
Through Mr. Deputy Mayor, I just want to confirm with Mike that the 4.6 million that's noted in B is the 0.5. It's not additional.
Mr. Zagaric, please.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. That's correct, Stephanie. The B represents the 0.5% that we've identified an alternative funding strategy for.
Okay, so through the chair, then, if you are wanting to replace that or remove the 0.5 increase that was approved at council and delete it and replace it to use funding from reserve, that would actually still have to wait.
So item B would be deferred to council, correct?
Correct, yes.
Mr. Zagaric, is there anything else in item C that is discretionary block funding that we would need to defer then?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, no. The only other, either through a motion or some approval, would be the allocation of the overall 4.5 million. So we've earmarked 1.5 for facilities and 3 million for transportation. So we would just need a motion or direction as it relates to the allocation of the $3 million at the appropriate time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councillor Collins, I think you were signaling me.
Sir, and I agree with the suggestion by the clerk to refer it to council for reconsideration. I would also like to amend, as was just suggested, that I think we need to be specific in terms of the minor maintenance investment for all wards. So if we could just revise the wording for the 3 million to reflect an equitable distribution of those funds to every ward, that would be the wording then that would go to council for consideration, just so we're clear. And on the roof question, I did pass along this morning a number of capital budget questions about facilities and other departments, and I do have some question about the roof investment. And so I don't want to amend that as yet. I understand what the intent is. We can let that go to council and maybe ask those questions in the interim. I did want to ask as well about the police revisions. And so we've taken 3 projects out of the capital budget submission. We've added 1. And so I'm seeking some direction through you from the clerk or from Mike in terms of how we accomplish those revisions, understanding that the book and budget was presented one way, and as the reconciliation that Mike referenced in his report, there are other projects. There is another project that needs to be added and 3 that need to be taken out.
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. Mr. Zagaric?
So maybe through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll start. And if Stephanie sees any gaps or errors in my comments, just invite her into the conversation. We'll reflect the board approved capital submissions in our capital documents going into the new year when committee receives the boards and agencies reports, and ultimately when council approves the overall budget, we'll amend through the final approved budget documents, ultimately what council approves as it relates to Hamilton Police Services. The one project that I suggested we need to to take away and have further conversations with Hamilton Police Services is the $500,000 for central facility, station facility study and retrofit project. Again, that's a revision that was before committee at the November 27th GIC. And previously, while that was an operating cost and properly reflected now as a capital cost, we'll just have to work with the service as to how to reflect and incorporate that on a go-forward basis as committee continues to deliberate on the Hamilton Police Service budget.
Terrific. So I would make those amendments, knowing that we're obviously not passing them today, but the book should be formally revised to reflect those changes. That's all.
Okay, so if the committee will bear with me, what I would like to do is have a motion on the recommendation as a whole and have it seconded to get it on the floor. It's moved by Mayor Eisenberger and seconded by Councillor Partridge. And now we need to do some amendments. So I believe, Madam Clerk, item B needs to be deferred to council, and that needs to be an amendment, correct, Madam Clerk?
You, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, I just wanted to raise one point. If council, before committee wishes to deliberate on this report, did they want to ask any questions of 6.1A, which is the additional information? I've noted it in the roadmap just in case, before we start making these amendments, if members of council haven't asked their questions for 6.1A, which is the additional information, we could defer consideration of this report until the questions have been asked of that one, just to make sure everybody's, does it make sense?
Yes, that makes eminent sense. So let's just defer further consideration of this item. And if we can turn our attention to item 6.1A in your agenda. And are there any questions on that? And if not, move receipt of that, and then we can move forward on the rest of it.
Yeah, but he didn't, so it's okay.
Okay, 6.1A. I'm trolling for any questions.
I'm going to reactivate the speakers list, folks. Just give me one quick second. Okay, the speakers list has been activated.
And I'm seeing no speakers for item 6.1. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Wilson. I'm sorry, Councillor Wilson. I didn't see your. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. To be perfectly fair and transparent to you, I working with one screen, I didn't get back into the main thing to press the question button. So that's why you didn't see me. So it's not your fault. It was mine.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I did have a question to Mr. Zagarek and or Mr. McKinnon. I'm not sure about our growth-related infrastructure financing, if I may. I'm still struggling with how we, in order to ensure we account for the cost of residential development, how we manage to appreciate what our future operating costs are related to a capital endeavor. So if I could give you an example, it's a road is said to be 100% DC financed. I thought you said that nothing is quite 100%, that about 30% is still paid for by existing taxpayers. But two, once that road is designed and constructed, and it does fall into our operating costs, and therefore probably into Mr. McKinnon's responsibility, where his budgets have to absorb that cost. And what I'm having difficulty doing is understanding how we show that and are publicly able to demonstrate that when we do expand residential development, that we are, after its initial construction, it does move into an operating ledger. And is there any way in which we can do a better job, in my opinion, of trying to reflect that. Thank you. That's my primary question.
Thank you. Mr. Zagarek, please.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll start, and again, I'll invite Dan if he has anything to add to the question. You'll see just in the information report on today's agenda is this was one of the topics that staff are reporting back on under response number 3. And I think what the councillor is highlighting is that while Appendix D of the budget document speaks to future operating costs, including staffing required to support investments, proposed 2021 investments in infrastructure, there is a gap as it relates to assets that are effectively contributed by developers to the city. And this is principally subdivision assets. So subdivision assets being the responsibility of the developer. When those projects are complete, they are contributed, transferred over to the city, and they aren't necessarily reflected as growth-related projects as other growth-related projects are in Appendix D, in that in Appendix D, staff identify future operating obligations for those projects. Consequently, what publics and focusing on public works because they may be the most impacted from this gap is that public works, you may recall their 2021 preliminary budget is about 4%, a 4% increase, and a portion of that 4% would be attributed to the additional households. I mentioned last week there's a cost associated to, for instance, waste collection, recycling collection with those additional households, as well as just maintaining those subdivision assets, the roads and sidewalks. And consequently, those are reflected as a maintenance budget in public works, and recognizing the fact that those really are attributed to new assets. They aren't necessarily maintenance budgets. So as it relates to how to remedy this, we could take it away. One approach would be to try to attribute it to growth through future capital budgets in a similar manner that we do other growth-related projects, and we report through, we are reporting through Appendix D to this year's report. So again, if it's the will of committee and council, we could take that away and look at an alternative approach as part of the 2022 budget process. And again, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm not sure if Dan has anything to add as it relates to providing those services as it relates to not only those assets, but as well as to the new residents and businesses that are attributed to growth.
Thank you, Mrs. Zagarek. Mr. McKinnon, do you have anything to add, sir?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I guess we have a bit of a hybrid model here, so we don't have a kind of comprehensive operating impacts from growth process by which those base budgets would come to us. We do capture some of them. For example, when we construct a new traffic signal, whether it's on an existing road or in a new subdivision, we get the operating impacts from that capital. That capital detail sheet would identify the operating impacts from the capital, so not necessarily from the growth. For example, if we were to determine through waste collections that we needed to increase our fleet of packers to keep up with growth, the bodies that we would ask for would come through the capital expenditure associated with the packer. Mm-hmm. So it's not. I guess it's not really transparent in the way that we show that it's actually an operating impact. Some of them are coming in through our operating impacts from capital, but there is a segment of those expenditures and those services that we're not accounting for at all. As Mike said, it comes in through our base budgets. And so for every new kilometer of road that we might have to plow or do crack sealing or just road maintenance in a new subdivision, because there's no capital detail sheet associated with that, those end up being just part of our base budgets, and then that's where the struggle comes as far as trying to get those funds for that type of growth.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Councillor?
Thank you very much to both of you. So in the interest of, I think, transparency and to assure that we are accounting for all necessary costs and their impacts on operating. I would like to put that forward that we could come up with some other accounting method, budgeting method in the next year to enable us to make that connection. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, I'll look to you and clerks for guidance, whether you need that in the form of a motion or soft direction.
We would need that in the form of a motion, given that it's for the budgets.
Okay.
So if you wanted to consider that, I'll go on to the next speaker, and then I'll come back to you, and you can provide me the language that you want to use.
Thank you.
Unless you had more questions, I'm sorry.
I do, but I'd like to work on the motion wording, so
Okay.
thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Jackson, please. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor Clark. Thank you, General Manager Zagarek, for the updated presentation. As you know, I'm always cognizant of reserves and our credit rating. And I see with your alternative option today for committee and council that the federal gas tax reserve, if the money's today approved by your alternative option, is a balance remaining of about $6 million. I know Hamilton Water Services, we recently used about $6 million to remove contaminated soil from Kenilworth Reservoir. We're parking a few $1 million from Hamilton Water Reserve, future improvements to Shadow Creek. Overall citywide reserve, unallocated reserves, not sure where that number stands. Mike, I guess, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to the General Manager, I've always believed in reserves, and I've always believed if there's ever a time that we've needed them, it's during this unprecedented pandemic time. Just overall, our standard of AA+ with Standards and Poor rating. Mike, with everything you're recommending today, how about just a general overview for the public consumption of how the reserves of the corporation of the city stand at this time? Through you, Deputy Mayor Clark, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Zagarek.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in fact, the Standard & Poor's latest credit rating, I believe, is on the next AFNA agenda as a staff report. But I can just draw from that report in that the city, one of the city's strengths as it relates to the external credit rating review is our liquidity, and liquidity really represents the funds that we have in banks and investments, our financial resources in order to get us through our obligations, whether it's our collective bargaining obligations with vendors, but as well to see us through if we were in a crisis situation such as this one, to see ourselves through the crisis situation. So we are very strong as it relates to our liquidity. That was a position taken not only by this council, previous councils, is to build in that capacity in case of situations such as this or the last recession in 2008 and 2009. There are some reserves that we need to continue to work on developing more sustainable strategies to fund those reserves. And again, that continues to be work that council or that staff will bring forward to council. But overall, we have strong liquidity. I don't expect, I see no reason that this alternative financing strategy would affect our credit rating. I'm fairly confident in saying that. Again, the gas tax reserve, the intent of the gas tax reserve is to invest in infrastructure. Again, this aligns with the intent of the reserve, and it aligns with investing in a timely manner in an effort to create jobs and to make improvements in our infrastructure.
General Managers, yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor Clark. General Manager Zagarek, again, so much of this is attributed to your leadership and your entire team, and to our senior leadership team of management, starting with the new city manager and our past city manager. And I'm just really so encouraged, upbeat, and feeling positive of even during a pandemic year, the reserves that councils past and present have built up to use at a time like this to hopefully help lower the final budget operating tax increase in 2021 to make it fair and reasonable for the majority of our constituents. We're going in the right direction, and you've raised my comfort level stating how solid we are with our liquidity and our reserves. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Clark. I thought that was important for public consumption. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and you were well within your time. Thank you very much. So we have an information report before us. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the information report. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by, somebody wave at me. Councillor Van Der Beek, thank you. That item is before us and it's an electronic vote. And then I will come back to Councillor Wilson to hear the wording on her motion so I can determine where in the agenda we insert that motion. So let's have the electronic vote now, please. And just to the electronic vote does not come up on your screen, please wave at me so that we can record your vote. Oh my gosh. Councillor Jackson, we regret to inform you that we've heard that that little boy has passed away.
I'm deeply saddened by that, Deputy Mayor Clark. Thank you. Deeply
Thank
saddened.
you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And the vote is completed and it has carried 13-0. Councillor Will, prepared to provide me the wording for your motion, or should I come back to you? Because we still have more work to do on today, so.
I'm just going to seek a little bit of help from Mr. Zagarek offline to make sure that I've got the wording right, if that's okay. If you're able to come back to me, I would appreciate it.
That would work perfectly. Thank you very
you.
much. And so now we're going to go back to, which item is it? Oh my gosh. 6.1. And we've already had a motion to move it, and we're dealing with the amendment on that motion. Oh, sorry. The clerk is waving at me madly. Oh, thank you. I'm freelancing off on my roadmap here, and she has reminded me that we need a motion to receive the presentation from Mr. Zagarek and staff. So moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Collins. All those in favor, that's also an electronic vote. Thanks for your help, Madam Clerk. We're bouncing around a little bit.
Just bear with me for a moment, folks. We
No
seem
problem.
to have a little bit of a spin thing happening.
Well, everything was going so well, so we've got to have
I know.
some issue somewhere.
Okay. The vote is on its way, folks.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
You're very welcome.
And the vote is up. And the vote is carried 12-0. So now we're back to 6.1. The recommendation was properly moved and seconded, and then we had an amendment that was to defer item B. And Councillor Collins, you had mentioned an annotation to that deferral to distribute the 3 million equally among the wards. So we need to attach that annotation to that deferral, Madam Clerk. Was there anything else, Councillor Collins, that needed to be? No, that's it. Thank you. So, Madam Clerk.
My apologies through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Were we deferring B and C?
Just B.
Just B. Okay.
Just B. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ferguson, you have a question?
Yes, I do, to Mike. Mike, and first of all, let me just say how much I appreciate you listening to us from last week and dealing with the minor maintenance, because that's virtually doubling the amount that was in there finding an ingenious way to keep that extra 0.5 or $4 million in the capital without having an impact on the levy, resulting in a levy increase of 2.8% while not affecting our credit rating. So we're lucky to have you. You're a genius at this stuff, and I just want to thank you for that. I also want to point out, you know, the operating or the capital budget come up to us 2 days before the last meeting. And I had a ton of questions, and I didn't understand a lot of it, but I had the opportunity the last few days to speak to staff, and they've explained everything to me, so now I understand it. My only question left is, Mike, what happens if at council next Wednesday, the rescinding vote doesn't get the 2/3 vote? Then what happens if we approve the operating budget today, or the capital budget today, sorry?
That's a good question, Mrs. Zagaric.
Yes. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So if I understand the question, under the scenario where at the December council meeting, if council were to move and approve the 2021 tax supported capital budget as reflected in the recommendation reports, that would reflect a 0.9% capital levy increase. That would then proceed on to the operating budget deliberations, and that 0.9 gets reflected again through council's final decision with respect to the overall 2021 tax supported budget process. So there would be one further opportunity for a reconsideration, and that would be in the new year, typically in March or April, when council approves the overall budget process. So again, if through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if I've interpreted the question correctly, is if approved at 0.9%, which is what the recommendation report reflects, we would build that into the overall budget deliberations in the new year, and there would be one further opportunity at the approval of the overall budget typically in March or April for a reconsideration.
Okay, so we go back up to 3.3% then as the impact on the levy if it's not rescinded at council on Wednesday. And quite frankly, I'm sensing that it will, Carrie, because you found an ingenious way to keep the capital dollars in place that the 0.5 would have increased, and you've solved the minor maintenance problems. So I'd be surprised if a rescinding vote doesn't carry, particularly into the recommendation of yourself. But is it appropriate though to approve the operating budget today when we don't know how that vote will go? We could save that for council, or
we're only dealing with the capital budget today.
I know, but the capital budget has a 0.9% in it for 0.9% impact on the levy, 4.4% for transit, and 5.5% for this. And if it doesn't get rescinded, it'll be a number I can't support. And so I don't know whether it's supported or not supported. I don't know the result of the rescinding motion to bring everything in line.
I can't help you there. I'm sorry. Madam Clerk?
I'm not sure if this is going to be a popular suggestion, but it is just solely a suggestion that if you wanted to discuss everything today, approve what you're comfortable approving, and defer the balance until after the reconsideration motion carries, then we would have to have an additional capital budget meeting to consider the
additional
balance.
capital budget meeting is okay. But and maybe a straw vote today on the rescinding might be, but I don't know if anybody else is having the same problem. I saw Chad's got his hand up. Maybe he's got something to offer on this, but it's a difficult decision when you don't know the outcome of a future vote. That's all.
I understand your struggle. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins, do you have something to add?
Yes, I would actually prefer another capital budget meeting. I know we've given pre-approval to staff as we have in prior years for 50% to go forward. So delaying it for one more meeting, which we have in the past on many occasions, certainly doesn't stand in the way of staff starting some of these projects early in the new year. I've only been through half of the book. And so we just received the book yesterday. I know it's been online for a little bit now, but I'm only through half the departments with my questions. I forwarded a number of them to you this morning, to my council colleagues and staff. So I would prefer procedurally another budget meeting in order to get at some of the issues that are in my email today, as well as some that I know I'll have for other divisions and departments on a go-forward basis. So I don't think delaying things hurts the process. We can certainly confirm that with Mr. Zagaric. And per Lloyd's suggestion, it gives us a little bit of time to deal with these other supplemental issues that are part of our discussion this morning.
And Mr. Chairman, I too don't mind another meeting also, even if it is later in December. We're not traveling at Christmas this year, any of us, so we could go a little bit later. I just want to get comfortable this reconsideration vote will carry. It sounds like it will, but I just want to see it before I would support it. In the budget book, I haven't received it yet. I know, Mike, you committed to it. I'm going to go out now to the municipal service staff and see if they have it there. But I would like a little more time to sort of run through it again, although most of my questions have been answered by Dan and the staff. That's all I got, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson, and Councillor Partridge held up the book so that we understand just how thick the book is. So yeah, we received it yesterday, but it was online. Councillor, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Mayor Eisenberger.
Happens all the time. Thank you so much. You know, I'm good with another meeting. I think you know, we would want to make sure that the vote on the capital 0.5 levy. I mean, the point was that some of us had support for the pause, but still wanted to get the work done and don't want to miss out on the infrastructure, you know, deficit opportunities. So I suspect it'll be supported, but I think it makes perfect sense to have another meeting. We're not going anywhere, so there's no run away to you know, any particular place that allows us to not be available. So additional meeting, I think, will be helpful in this instance. I'd still like to get the capital budget done prior to Christmas, but an extra meeting is not going to do any harm. So we can approve what we can approve today in terms of item A, but if we want to refer the whole thing to the next budget roundup, I'd like to at least get one element you know, out of the way, and that wouldn't be a bad thing, but all the other elements can be dealt with in a future meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go to the clerk for some advice here. So with the motion on the floor and we have an amendment on the floor, should I proceed with the amendment and then decide how we're going to deal with the rest of the motion in terms of deferrals, or because the amendment gives direction how it's going to come back at council. So
yep. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to make it cleaner, I would recommend that if it is committee's wish today to just approve subsection A, then defer the balance to the next capital budget meeting. It would be much cleaner than making an amendment and having them come back to council. I would just hold back on B altogether, because if we approve A at that same meeting, we can put forward the motion to reconsider to remove the 0.5 altogether. That would let finance staff draw from the reserves, and then you wouldn't need the 0.5 increase. And if that carries, at least you know where you are for the next capital budget meeting. It would be much cleaner to do that. You may still want to ask questions today and go through it so that staff are fully prepared for the next meeting. But that would be a much cleaner way.
and so at the next council meeting, Councillor Collins could still move the reconsideration for B to get that done.
Yes.
And then that would remove that item from here, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so I think I understand. So I'm looking to my colleagues now. So the amendment, we need to have that removed. Councillor Collins, do you agree to remove the amendment on B? So procedurally, that is in order now. So the amendment has been removed from the floor. And the mover of the motion, I'd like you to withdraw your motion for the entire thing, and then we'll entertain a motion just on part A. Okay, everyone, is there agreement? Just come nodding heads would be really helpful. Thank you very much. So we're starting fresh now, and the motion, I'm looking for a motion on recommendation A only, moved by Mayor Eisenberger. I keep doing that, Mayor Eisenberger, and seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any discussion on A only? Seeing none, I will now entertain the vote electronically. Thank you. I will come to Councillor Wilson after this motion, please. Thank you.
Just bear with me for
And
a
I
moment.
really appreciate the cooperation here, because some of this stuff is a little bit complicated.
Mr. Chairman, I found the book. It was it was delivered here, so thank you, Mike. It was delivered, and they put it on Kathy's desk, and of course she's not in.
Naturally. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. And we're just waiting for the vote to come up on A.
And the vote's on its way.
Thank you. There we go.
Mr. Chair, I'm back. Stephanie, if you could record me, so thank you.
Okay, were you included in the vote? So that was after the vote? You want to rescind the vote, or you? Councillor Johnson says she's okay. Thank you. Okay, so we've now dealt with 6. Do I have to refer anything? Everything stands alone. We're just going to bring it back to the next GIC meeting, correct, Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we do need a motion to defer subsections. We can do it after any further discussion, but we would need a motion to defer subsections C through I.
Okay, is there any further discussions on items C through I on 6.1? Seeing none, I need a motion to defer items C through I. Councillor Partridge and Councillor Collins has a question.
Thanks,
sir.
I just wondered, sorry, I'm trying to bump between two different reports here. So 6.1 is the entire budget. And when are we asking divisional questions today? Is now that time, or when do we?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So thank you then, Mr. Chair. I didn't want to lose an opportunity to ask them. And I think
except for police services, which is 7.1 in our report. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could.
Yep, absolutely.
I have sent an email through to everybody this morning. Sorry, there's another mic on there. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm starting you over, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. So I have questions related to a number of the departments this calendar year were affected by COVID, and I don't sit on the Capital WIP committee anymore. I had the opportunity to go through the outstanding capital items that are included for all departments in that report. And there are a number of departments and divisions that noted in their projects from 2000, going back as far some of them as 2015 through 2020, there are a number of departments that have been impacted. And so the explanation as to why projects either haven't started or have been substantially delayed has resulted in the fact that there are literally dozens, if not over 100 different projects that have the entire balance that was originally approved in the account. And so if I could, I think I'd like to start with culture, if I could. And if I'll refer you to the budget book on, well, for those who have culture in front of them, it's page 62 in the book. I know a lot of people might be online. If I could ask Mr. Zagaric, or I'm assuming that would be Jason. So
we have a long list of staff here, so go ahead, sir.
Perfect. So you know, the culture division has one of the longest lists of unfinished projects in the book. There's 44 open accounts right now. And if memory serves me right, Culture has about a $2 million block funding that they get every year. And right now, if you were to look at unfinished projects, there's about 4 years, $8 million worth of money in the accounts. And of course, this is a report that was presented at the end of June, beginning of July this year. So there may be a little bit of changes that have occurred in the last 2 or 3 months. Of the 1.8 million that we approved for Culture last year, only one project of 11 is over 50% completed. Most of the projects haven't started, and as I referenced earlier, a number of the projects were impacted by COVID. The second one on that list is at the 35% range, and so my concern is that if you look in the budget book, there's another almost a dozen projects that are being requested. It represents about $1.7 million levy investment. And my question is in terms of capacity. So we're behind in 2020. You can go back and I've given you all the projects there from prior years that haven't started, 217, 218, 219. There are projects that have balances where staff have provided explanation and good ones in terms of why they haven't started. You know, I question the logic of providing another 10 or 11 projects to this division where many of these projects probably won't be started or initiated in 2021. So my question through you, Mr. Chairman, to staff is what's the likelihood or probability that any or all of these will be started in 2021? Why would we tax the public for resources that aren't going to be used?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Thorne.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll begin, and Carrie Brooks Joyner is here as well to speak to some of the specifics. So there are a couple of categories of projects within those WIPs. Some relate to, there was a couple of projects that were awaiting a federal or provincial contribution through a granting program prior to tendering, so we can tender to the full amount. So there are a couple of projects that fit within that category. I know that the public art projects, they tend to have a much longer lead time than a normal capital project, given a fairly extensive, sometimes a year or two public process that goes into a public art project, because we initiate consultation on sort of a theme and vision for a piece, and then we do a jury process, and then we do an art call, and then we do another round of public consultation, then a jury deliberation. So that they tend to be much longer in the queue, going from sort of initiation of the capital funding to actual execution of the project. And then we do have a number of projects that are going through the procurement process currently. We did make a change to how we do reporting on some of the cultural projects a couple of years back. We used to just have, for example, a single line item that might say Dundurn Castle, and then over the years, projects would go in, projects would go out, anything to do with Dundurn Castle. So what we started to do, and why it seems like a longer list, is we've begun to itemize. So it's not just Dundurn Castle, it's Dundurn Castle Roof or Dundurn Castle Pathway, so that there's better transparency and tracking of the individual projects. That does result sometimes in a longer list, as opposed to just having one item that says Dundurn Castle. That's a bit of an overview. Carrie Brooks Joyner, the director, is here if there's sort of some questions about some of the specific line items. And perhaps to the general question of sort of the capacity to deliver on the projects, I'll maybe refer that one to her to speak to.
Yeah, and specifically, first you could reference 2020 projects that aren't complete. And so I did note Culture provided explanation for past projects that aren't completed in 2020. Many of them were COVID related, so I completely understand that. And, you know, I'm looking at Griffin House, 100,000 not started, Kiefer, HMST Kiefer, 200,000 not started, Whitehorn Masonry not started. You know, Dundurn exterior, as you just mentioned, they're specific, 75,000 not started, Gage House windows, you know, virtually not started, Heritage Resort, like all of the projects in 2020 as of July 1st this year. You know, we have an entire budget year that basically, you know, none of these projects had seen any movement or at least withdrawals from the account, which is a sign of either a delay or inactivity. And I, you know, I've listed for you prior years, and as you mentioned, 2 or 3 of them are public art. So I certainly would take into account the explanation you provided for that. But if I'm looking at what's gone on in 2020, 2019, and 2018, the department, compared to others, the list for culture is quite long compared to almost every other division. You know, my concern, Jay, is the capacity issue. So will we be here at this time next year looking at the 2021 list and saying, geez, of the 11 items, you know, why were 7 or 8 of them not started? And we're at the point where for many of these line items, it's not just that they're not started, many of them aren't completed as well. So, you know, I'm hoping I'm putting some context behind some of those questions in terms of it really speaks to capacity and the ability to do the work. I don't want to stand in the way of somebody maintaining or repairing a facility, but I'm loath to provide resources and they're just going to sit in an account when we have all kinds of other pressures in the organization, whether it be housing, roads, and sidewalks. I mean, there's no shortage of deficits in some areas of the city where if those monies were provided to other areas, they would be used in that calendar year. So I'm sorry for going on with that that context and sort of the preamble.
Thank you, Councillor. And you're past your 5 minutes, so we'll hear a response from Ms. Brooks Joyner, and you may have a supplementary to that, given the time. Ms. Brooks Joyner.
Thank you, and through the chair, and thank you, Councillor Forey, for your question. You are correct that tourism and culture does have a number of WIPs, and these are representative of the breadth of our portfolio, and they do cover public art, the heritage buildings that we're stewards for, and the museums that we operate, as well as cultural projects. And significant progress has been made on the WIPs since the June report. And I realize that the information that you have in front of you is dated prior to June. For example, the heritage accounts have committed purchase orders of works in progress of $755,000, which is not representative in the information that you have before you. Additional expected purchase order commitments by Q2 of 2021, pending procurement, will be another $2.5 million for both the St. Mark's Church Restoration Project and the Gage House Porch Restoration Project combined. So I'm confident we do have the capacity to move these projects forward. I do want to emphasize that these are planned to be multi-year projects, and as Jason noted, our public art processes are typically 2 to 3 years and include a high level of public consultation. And similarly, our heritage projects are in different stages of completion as they are expected. I think Jason mentioned both Children's Museum and Griffin House are waiting for confirmation of federal dollars, and COVID has certainly had some impact in 2020 on our capital projects with the availability of trades and materials, but overall significant progress has been made since June.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks Joyner. Councillor, did you have a follow-up question before, or
I
can
would,
on the next list?
Yeah, I would just ask supplementary to those.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I could ask Chad if he could give us the page number he's on to help us stay with him where he is, because it's very interesting what he's bringing up.
I'm on page 62 in the budget book. I don't know where it is. I'm assuming the same references are online, but I haven't cross-referenced the book to the online information.
Go ahead,
and
Councillor
sorry,
Collins.
and sorry, I'm also working from the WIP accounts, which I took from the committee agenda from, I think it was November. So I would ask through you, Mr. Chairman, then, there's all kinds of delays, and Carrie, I think, has summarized why some of them have been delayed. My question still stands as it relates to the projects that are on the 2021 capital budget sheet. How many of those would be started, and how many of them would be completed by year end? And I understand some of them are associated with multiple years, but again, we addressed 2020, but there's 2019. 2018 has a number of projects that aren't completed, and it seems like there's a long lag between the time that the money is provided to the department and the time that it's actually spent, either through a purchase order or in partnership or consultation with other levels of government.
Mr. Thorne?
Chair, perhaps I can jump in on this one and provide a public art example.
Sure, go ahead.
So through the chair, the councillor is correct on the lag of expenditures for some projects. However, that is built into our process, particularly on our public art projects. It's required that the budget be in place before we issue a call to artists. So we consider the project started at the time of the call of artists' issue and not at the time of the first major expenditure from the account. And this, in comparison with other capital projects, is different in that the time for design and tendering is included within the whole process. So the WIP process appears to be much longer as the expenditures are at the end of the project and not front-loaded.
Okay.
Councillor Collins, do you have we have no other speakers, so if you have another question, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I have pages of questions that I've asked, and so maybe what I'll do, Mr. Chairman, is I've provided all of the questions that I have in writing to council. I think I forwarded them this morning to both Jeanette and to Mike, and in fairness, they probably should be sent to all of the GMs. And I haven't been through all the departments yet, but I want to leave you with the theme of, so I'll take my questions offline. I'm going to provide them to council as well. I want to leave you with the theme of, we are continuing to provide resources to all divisions and departments. And in many instances, these projects aren't starting for well over a calendar year. And there are literally tens of millions of dollars sitting in account that aren't being used after they've been allocated by staff. And so I certainly respect and understand COVID has placed great strain on departments and challenges as it relates to not only completing projects, but starting them in the first place. And the dilemma that we have is that those same challenges in part will be in front of us in 2021. I need to be assured that if we're approving something through the capital budget process, that in fact, those resources are going to be used. And so I'm not discounting the fact that they're required or needed, but I want to make sure that they're going to be used. And I don't have confidence with the list that I see with the WIP report that was just provided and some of the requests that I see here today. You know, we have people that haven't used an open account in 19 and 20 asking for same resources for the same project in 2021 when those projects haven't been started. So I'm going to leave you with that theme. I'm going to send my emails through to committee and to council, and I'll also share them with SMT. And if I can receive those answers between now and the next budget meeting, it sounds like where there's support for another meeting, then we can continue to share those answers with council. And I think there's lots of room here for maybe reappropriating or taking some resources out, with the expectation that these projects, may need to be resubmitted in future years. So sorry for that long explanation, but I mean, I could be here for another hour or two with all of the questions that I've sent you today. And if I'm hearing there are no other speakers, I will seek to accomplish some of these questions that I have, or seek the answers to some of these questions I have offline.
Sorry about that. I muted myself. Thank you, Councillor Collins. And if we can just share all that information with the rest of the committee members, that would be very helpful. Councillor Wilson, are you prepared to verbalize your motion? Oh, sorry, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, through Mr. Deputy Mayor, we just need to be careful that if you're emailing back and forth about items, it would be considered debating a matter that is still before committee without the information being before. So it's one thing to ask staff questions at committee and then have them respond, but the information should be provided publicly as well.
So then I would suggest that staff take the email that Councillor Collins sent out this morning as direction to report back to the next GIC on those items, and maybe an information report would be helpful. Councillor Collins, would that be appropriate?
Yeah, and my dilemma is I'm only halfway through the department, so I will have a subsequent email that covers all the others. So if you don't mind me adding to my list of questions.
I think it's fair game for a councillor to ask questions of the staff for a report to come back to the budget. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll have others to come, so I agree with your direction.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate that. Councillor Farr, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, I can. Please proceed.
Yeah, I appreciate the former speaker's annual exercise, and I actually got to work right away when I saw that email this morning and have some answers for him specifically on a couple of Ward 2 projects. I think the reason why he sees this, and you'll agree, and all of us will, is just to keep us in the loop because many of those highlighted items, of which he has very good questions for, on a budgetary in a budgetary way are specific to our own wards. And so we appreciate the heads up and having that in the form of an information report and getting those answers publicly are good too. So all of that said, what I'm discovering, and this is sort of when I looked over many of the appendices to this last week, where are we able to, through you to Mike Zagaric, highlight pinpoint delays caused by COVID. It seems a little bit to me right now. It's sort of something where we'd have to figure that out on our own through an investigation and other aspects. It's front and center. So, are we at all looking at, Mike, or is it way too onerous of an exercise to where it is specifically related to a capital project delay due to COVID? We could identify that through you, Mr. Chair.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we do report publicly. It's through our WIP closing reports, not through the budget document process. Our next report is scheduled for February 23rd. And as Councillor Collins has referenced, I believe he's drawing from a June report. So we'll be able to provide some revised in-year financial costing and investment reporting through that February report. So again, we do report publicly. I can't recall if it's 2 to 3 times a year, but through our WIP closing report and through the work of the subcommittee meeting that Councillor Collins referenced.
And if it is a COVID delay through you, Mr. Chair, to Mike, that WIP's February report will recognize that then.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if COVID was a factor that would be referenced in that report, as well as other factors. And it could be challenges with respect to vendors that, again, could be tied to COVID.
Okay. I was perfectly happy, Mr. Chair, to defend both St. Mark's and the King William Art project this morning, but I like the route we're taking to be focused on a staff response at a future meeting, near future meeting, on this annual exercise, line by line exercise by the good Councillor Collins. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. My next speaker would be Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. And I very much appreciate the line of questions. I have a question. Taxpayers, I believe it was in 2019, taxpayers on the levy did put money into a project that was a public art project for Waterdown. And I believe it was $150,000. There wasn't any projects that the community could agree on or approve. In other words, they didn't like any of the projects that were brought forward. Some did, some didn't, but there was a huge negative backlash on the projects that were put forward for approval. So the project was canceled, but I thought I was told that the money would no longer be put towards a project in Ward 15, even though it was identified as that in the capital budget, and that it's now going towards something else or another project in another ward. And I don't really understand that. So, you know, this happened a while ago, and it's been kind of, you know, fermenting in the back of my brain as something I'm not entirely happy with. So, Carrie, I'm just wondering if I could get a bit of an explanation on that. Is that typically what happens?
Ms. Brooks Joyner, please.
Through the chair, Councillor, I'm familiar with that. The project was canceled. I would have to look into it more closely to see what budget was being tapped for that project. But I think it's fair to say when a project is canceled, the dollars go back into the public art reserve. But let me check on the facts and confirm back with you.
No, and I appreciate, yeah, thank you, Chair. And I appreciate that, Carrie, because you know, the projects that were put forward, and yes, there was a charade of local artists that did pick something, but, you know, now I've got the Rotary Club, thank goodness for our Rotary Clubs, who have put together the money and purchased 3 gaming tables that, you know, are very artistic looking. And so they're being installed as of yesterday. So there's a service club that's raised all kinds of money to put towards a project that is now being installed in our park that everybody is in love with. And yet the public art money that was earmarked for Ward 15 is no longer going to Ward 15. So I'm just a little, I'm concerned because, again, coming back to what Councillor Collins has said, you know, year after year, these projects come forward. And I'm not just picking on culture, by the way. Year after year, these projects come forward. We put it on the levy, we approve it. taxpayers get taxed, the money goes into an account, and then it doesn't go to where it's earmarked to go. It ends up going back into the fund, and it's still sitting there. So that was 2 years ago that taxpayers paid for that money. So I'm really uneasy that it may appear that we are continually taking taxes from requiring taxes from our residents, and then it's sitting in reserves and it's not really being used for the projects it was intended to. And I'm not saying that as a general statement across the city that happens, but in this particular case, that one really bothered me. I'd like to get an answer for that, but Carrie, I thank you for your comments anyway. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted everybody to be aware of that because it may happen in other wards too. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The next speaker is Councillor Jackson, please.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Clark. Hearing the loss of the little Strickland boy just kind of puts everything in perspective. So I want to always commend Councillor Collins at budget time, who drills down much deeper than I'll speak for myself. I'm into my budget books, but boy, does he ever drill down deep. And we all, I think, benefit, whether the decision at the end of the day is the same or not amongst us, but I think we all benefit and have edification from the work he does. So Councillor Collins, thank you. I didn't mind, Deputy Mayor, I leave it to your ruling how we proceed today. I didn't mind Councillor Collins carrying on further with the email he sent to us and staff in terms of even for some public consumption, beginning the conversations. Of course, I don't think we're going to end today, obviously, seems to be the will, and I agree with another meeting. I would just say on behalf of one of the areas of the lodges that he's pointed out, and it's good for Senior Administrator Holly Odiardi and General Manager Johnson to respond. I know on the one point he's pointed out about the D-Wing renovations at Macassa Lodge that is over 35 years old and long overdue, doesn't even meet standard right now. I know she's working with the ministry to get appropriate cost-sharing funding. And so we were hoping to have a great announcement, but everything's in a state of abeyance with regards to that. So, but that would have been as well important information to come forward to the cogent questions on various departments that Councillor Collins has asked for. So whether today or at the next meeting, I think this general discussion of where the whips stand and where block funding stands and where departments hold monies, as long as justified both now and in the future, is germane to the best we're doing on behalf of our taxpayers. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Okay, I have no speakers left on the list. And Councillor Wilson, did you wish to verbalize your motion now?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chair Clark. We'll just ask for some confirmation from Clerk. It sounds like we're going to be having another capital budget meeting. So I can read the motion, but I'd like to leave it as a notice. And that way I can, that will enable my colleagues to, look at it and think about it.
We appreciate that, and that is most appropriate.
Okay, so shall I read it?
Madam Clerk? Sorry, Madam.
I'm so sorry to interrupt through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Before I move over to notices of motion, only because then I have to click off this item, may I please get the motion to defer subsection C through I to the next meeting? To vote on that?
Did we not do that?
We didn't vote on it, no.
Okay. My apologies, everybody. We've been jumping around a little bit. So I need a motion to defer item C through I. I believe I thought it was Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Ferguson that had moved that last time, but somehow we didn't vote on it. So we're going to vote on it now. And there it goes. And the vote is up. I'm sorry. No, I understand completely. We've been jumping around a little bit, but we're getting things done. That's okay.
Councillor Pearson, are you able to vote?
Nope, she is raising her hand in support. Councillor Johnson is in support. Is that everyone?
I'm just double checking. I believe it is, yes.
Super. And that's 14-0. Thank you. And so back to Councillor Wilson. So if you'd like to put your notice of motion forward.
Thank you. The notice of motion would read as follows: that staff review and investigate alternative budget reporting approaches of operating impacts from contributed assets and report back through the 2022 tax supported capital budget process. My thanks to Mr. Zagarek for assisting me on this matter.
Thank you very much. And so that is a notice of motion, which will be at our next budget GIC meeting. Thank you. So now we are now moving on to, and I'm being redundant again, 7.1, which is the Hamilton Police Services Board. So you have before you a letter from the Police Services Board and then a recommendation report. Is there any presentation on this, Madam Clerk? Nope. So we're...
Mr. Deputy.
I'm interpreting you're shaking your head no.
Sorry, Anna Felice is here.
Okay, so Anna Felice from the Police Department is here to answer any questions that councillors may have on this. So I will, to facilitate things, I'll take a motion to move the recommendation and a seconder, and then we can have the discussion. Is moved by Mayor Ratzenberger and a seconder is Councillor Collins.
Through you, Mr. Deputy. I'm so sorry. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I have activated the speakers list just because there are 4 separate recommendations. If it is something committee wishes to vote on today, we will have to consider items 1, 2, 3, and 4 separately, unless they're all up for approval at once. Okay, thank you.
Okay. The floor is open. So we have Councillor Collins. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, Mr. Chair, I was just going to ask that to be consistent with all the other capital items that we bump this to the next meeting and allow certainly any questions or comments, not preventing any today, but if there are any between now and the next meeting, I think it'd be beneficial as well. So I don't know procedurally if we need to move these and defer them as part of the entire budget package, or I'd seek your guidance and the clerks, but I just want to be consistent with what we've done with all the other operating departments.
I understand. Madam Clerk, can you provide me some advice?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. If it is committee's wish to defer the entire item of 7.1 to the next budget meeting, which, by the way, is December the 18th. I just sent you out the invite, so please accept. Then we can certainly do that, but you can ask questions today as well. So if you're putting that motion on the floor, we can do the deferral motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Collins, for that suggestion. Councillor Ferguson, you had questions?
Yes, I do. Through to Anna if I can. So Anna, the personal issued radio replacement of $3.6 million. This seems to be an ongoing saga where fire does the procurement for public works, police, and fire. And now you're coming in with another radio for $3.6 million. I don't know if it's before your time, but back in 2010, we paid $24 million for a complete new communication system. Last year, the Motorola, in its wisdom, says the software is now 10 years old, had to be replaced, and wanted another $15 million, which puzzled me to no end. But now you're back, separate from fire, asking for $3.6 million. It was suggested last time by your chair that this is the physical radios. And so can you just explain why we get some of it through a consolidated approach with fire, and then now we get police, and I suspect public works might be next, coming back for a further $3.6 million in communication equipment?
Thank you, Councillor. And Ms. Felice, a proper introduction for yourself. You're the Chief Administrative Officer of the Hamilton Police Service. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Nice to see you. Through the chair to the councillor, the Motorola contract, which we negotiated in partnership with Fire last year, was really to upgrade and extend our services for another 15 years. That contract did not include the personal issued radios. Prior to negotiating that contract, we were notified by Motorola that those radios had reached end of life, and so we can't get parts and repair them. Initially, they wanted us to replace them all at once. However, we were able to extend the life of those radios. So the requests that you see before you and for the next several years are to phase in the new radios because we're unable to access the ones we're currently using or the parts for them. I believe I'm not sure which radios Fire is using, but if they're using the ones that we are, then they'll be in the same boat and we'll be having to replace theirs as well.
So the $3.6 million is just a first phase in, is it?
This, the 3.6 million is, let me just refer to my, so that it's not all at once. We're not asking for 3.6 million this year.
So 3.6 is spread over a number of years then, is it?
That's correct. So for 2021, we're requesting 840,000. And then for 22, 23, and 24, 1.4 million per year. And then we should have them all replaced and they'll be effective for the length of this contract with Motorola.
And were they purchased in 2010 when we did all the, so they've had a 10-year life now?
I'd have to confirm when they were purchased because it does predate me quite a bit, but I know that we've had them, I believe, over 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that and yeah, you're probably in high school, and so.
Oh, thank you.
So, you know, if we're having another meeting and you're coming back, then maybe you could get an answer for that. Because the whole Motorola thing concerns me. I've had some communication people I've talked to since the Fire got their approval on another 15 million last year. That if Motorola is telling you that they won't service anything after 10 years, you need to throw them out and find a new vendor. And so we continue to go on every year, and this is big money for communication. And certainly communication with fire and police are critical, as with public works. But I just worried that we're doing this through a non-competitive process with a vendor that doesn't continue to service equipment after 10 years. So if you could just confirm that for me, that the current radios are 10 years old for the next meeting, I'd be much appreciative. I guess the others, yeah, my questions have been withdrawn now. One was the ICE equipment. Of course, we transferred that over to Fire. So I think that's all the questions I have now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other councillors with questions? Seeing not, Madam Clerk, do we need a motion to defer? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilson.
I've just lost my eScribe page, so forgive me. I just want to make sure I understand. I do understand that you're seeking, or council is seeking to defer this, but I want to understand what's on the table for approval. That the Hamilton Police Services Board is seeking approval just for items 1 to 4, but that the other items, are they seeking for us to embed those in our 10-year capital budget? Is that what they're also seeking approval of?
Ms. Felice?
Through the chair. So the 4 items that we're bringing forward right now are is a roof for Central Station. That's the first one. The second one is the portable issued radios. We've got an air cooler, cooled chiller replacement for our Eastern Station, and then the next generation 911 system that Mr. Zagaric referred to earlier. As well, still up for discussion, which may be included with the city request, is the 500,000 for Central Station retrofit. We do have some things that need to be taken care of there. We've run out of locker space. We've got some security issues that need to be resolved on our main floor, and all as a result of us moving into the forensics building. All of the other items are for future years. The Glock program currently has been removed. Initially, when we included that in our long-term capital plan, we were worried that there was going to be a supply issue with our current firearms and ammunition. That's since resolved, so we've removed it. However, the ICE rescue is still on the table just for a future year, as well as the mobile command vehicle that was listed. It will be required at some point in time. We did defer them, just given the state of the financials for this year.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So you're looking, I had some questions about the mobile command center, but we're not going to be approving that through this budget exercise. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
So I will, if that comes up again in the future, I'll ask my questions then. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here and your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any more questions from any other councillors on the committee? Seeing that, Madam Clerk, is it appropriate to defer this to the next budget GIC meeting?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Okay, so Councillor Collins, would you like to move that motion to defer it? And Mayor Eisenberger, you'll second it. So the entire item of 7.1 is being deferred to the next budget GIC meeting, and the vote is up in a moment. Lickety split, there it is. And while that's happening,
Thank you. The vote is closed.
and the vote passes 13, zero no's and 1 abstention. Thank you. And 2 absent. And so now I'm looking for notices of motion, and I'm not trolling for them, but if there are any notices of motions that are ready to go, seeing none, we're at the moment where I can ask for motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. And is that an electronic vote, or we just go yay? It's an electronic vote. Yay.
Vote is open.
The vote is up. And thank you, councillors, for your cooperation today, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Pleasure. Thank you. And the vote carries. Thank you.